Hello, my name is Tony, and welcome to video number 4 of the Mega Man tutorial series in Unity. And in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to create the animations for the explosions on Mega Man and the enemies. And we're also going to add some code to check these animations out by binding some keys so we can have them happen on command for debugging. And so let's replay this. This is what the final product is going to look like. So if we shoot the penguin, that's the big explosion, and that's the small explosion. And what we're also going to do is we're going to have it so that Mega Man can be affected, get damage if he actually touches the explosions. So we see he gets hit by that small one and hit by that one too. And what we're going to do with the key bindings is we're also going to introduce freezing the player on screen. So if I press P, he's frozen on the screen. So I can still move him around back and forth and I can shoot, but he's basically frozen. And we also introduce K, so what that'll do is freeze the input, so we can't get any, it'll stop the input from the player, so they won't be able to shoot or do anything. They'll be really frozen. And let's turn that off. We can also freeze bullets and let go of the player, and we're going to explode. That's our explode effect. And one more thing we're going to do, we're going to play this one more time. We're going to be invincible by pressing I. So now we created invincibility before, but now we tied it to the key so we can do it whenever we want. If we turn it off, we can get hit and get explode. So let's get started. So where we left off in the last video was when we killed our enemies, they would just disappear off the screen. So in this video we're going to be doing the animations for their explosions, and it should be a pretty lengthy video because we're going to create two explosions. The first one's a simple one where it's just 4 frames. It's just a small explosion, but then we're going to have the more elaborate, larger explosion, which Killer Bomb uses. So, and what we're going to do first though is I wanted to edit the, let me get this out of the way first. I wanted to make some changes to the bullet. For freezing, we're going to need to tag it. We don't have to freeze the bullet, but we're going to add it to freeze. So the whole point of the freezing is when we get to the point of our character dying, we want to pause all activity on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to create functions and flags in each of for our enemies, the player, and any projectiles like a bullet. We can do it for the explosions too, but we're going to skip that. If you want, you can, when we're done doing the bullet, and you see how it's done with the bullet, you can take a stab at it and try and do it for the explosion too. It's pretty much the same exact way of doing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a tag, and we're going to call it bullet. And that's the first thing that we're going to do. So we're going to tag our bullets so that all the bullet objects that get created are going to have this tag bullet, so we'll be able to find them in the scenes through code. And another thing I wanted to do was add an animator. Now, although our bullets are not, there are no animations on them, we're just going to throw this in here just in case we ever wanted to do that, so it's there. Why isn't this adding? There it goes. So we're going to add on an animator. And what we're going to do, if you don't already have the bullet script open it up in Visual Studio. So just go to the scripts, double click it. So we're going to add animator. to get a handle on it. Get component. And save that. And that's what we're going to do for right now. So we're going to come back to adding the freezing to this later. Let's go back over to here. Come on. There you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some organization. We're going to create some directories to keep some of the stuff organized. So first we're going to go into assets and animations. We're going to create two folders in here. First one we're going to call it player, so we can separate the player's controller and animations out, so not everything is all dumped into one folder. And then we're going to create a folder called effects. The effects are basically the explosions, and it could be anything else that we add into the game later. And then inside of effects, we're going to create three subfolders. The first one is going to be called Explode Effect 1. The second one is Explode Effect 2. And the last one is going to be Player Explode Effect 1. Now we only have one explode effect for the player, but we're going to have two for the enemies. But if you ever wanted to try and create a second player explode effect, you can create another folder and put all your animations and controllers in there. So next, I'm going to go down to Prefabs. We're going to create two folders in here. We're going to create another folder called Effects. So this is where we're going to store all of our explosion prefabs when we're done creating them. And then we're going to create another folder called Projectiles. And this is where we're going to drop the bullet in there so it doesn't get mixed up with this stuff. So we're going to keep that separate. So now that we have a little bit of organization, we were done with our bullets, so we can go back out of that. And we're going to create a new script. So go down to Assets and Scripts, and we're going to create a new C# script. And this one's going to be called Explosion Script. And we're going to open that up. Come on. There. But we'll code it later, so just leave it open and then go back over to Unity. So the first thing we need to do is we need the sprites, the frames for these explosions. And if you happen to take a look in the enemies graphic that we had used for getting the penguin, you may have noticed in the bottom left, let's open it up, there are actually some explosions down here and these little bullets too, which we will get to those when we get to the end of creating enemies. But we're going to look at these here. So we have these explosions here. So this is the small explosion. First frame, second frame, third frame, fourth frame. So, oops. Turn that off. Now I'm wondering if I lose stuff. Hold on a second. I lose my changes. Nope, still has the animator. Okay. Game object hasn't. Okay. Whatever. Let's go back to the graphics, and we're going to open this back up. So we have these 4 frames here that we're going to cut out. So to make it easier to see, we're going to switch it over to black and white. And then we're going to start with the first frame. So we're going to call it, I'm just going to call it Explode 1. And we're going to keep the pivot in the center. So apply that. Get the second frame. can call that explode 2. Get the third frame. Call that explode 3. And the last frame, I'm going to call that explode 4. So there. Now we have our 4 explosions. So we can close that out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a, let's bring this over. So we're going to create an empty here. And then we're going to call it explode effect 1. So actually, yeah, we're going to need it. You can zero out the coordinates. And on the explode effect, first, if you noticed, all the sprites in that sheet are kind of small, so we're going to bump up the scale on whenever we pull out of that to 1.5 on each of those. So it's 1.5 times the size that it is from the sheet. And on here, we need a sprite renderer, and we need a circle collider. So this is what's going to detect if Mega Man touches an explosion. So we're going to use the circle collider on that. And we need an animator controller. And then what we're also going to do is get this out of the way. We're going to go to our scripts, and we're going to add on the explosion script, which we will code later. So with these, we're going to change the layer order. We're going to put this on the same order as our player and enemy. So this is going to be on 10. And the circle collider is a trigger. And the Z, where do we here? Is this the radius? We're going to start at 0. So there's no size to it at all. So let's save those changes. Next, we're going to have to create the explode effect animation controller and animation that we're going to work with. So we're going to go over to Effects, Explode Effect 1. Let's move this out of the way, actually. Right click in here, and then we're going to create a new animator controller. So we're going to call this Explode Effect 1. And then we're going to create an animation that we're just going to call Explode. And on explode, just make sure that there's no loop time. This is going to play once and that's it. We don't want it to repeat. So with this selected, actually first double click the animation controller, go back over to project, highlight explode, right click in here and set it so that the explode animation is on that controller. So with our game object, we're going to put that controller onto that game object, and now we have explode. So this is where we're going to start doing the frames. First thing, we're going to change the frame rate to 15 because I found that that's actually a good speed for this animation. And then we're going to go to the graphics. We're going to expand this out, and we have explode 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to drop, let's spin this out, drop the first one twice, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 4. So these are it's going to be the explosion. Can't really see it all that well, but with this, then we're going to add on the circle colliders enabled property. And we're also going to add on, I'm not sure if I can get, yes I can, the circle collider's radius. And last but not least, the sprites enabled for visibility. So we need these three properties as part of our animation. So let's preview it. We're going to bring the window back over here. It'll be a pain in the butt a little bit. Let's see. There it is. So there's the animation right there. Okay. So let's set ourselves in record mode because we're going to change the properties of these for each of the frames. So we're going to start on frame 1. So on the first frame, we're going to turn off the render. And that's the only change we're going to make to there. On this one, we're going to turn the render back on, and the size of the circle collider, this is actually not that great. Hold on a sec. Let's do this. We'll zero it back out after. This speaker icon is in the way. Okay, so let's do that again. So on here, we're going to check the size here, and it's kind of really small. So we're going to bump that up to 0.02 to take the full size of the circle. On the next frame, we're going to change the size of that to 0.08. And on this one, it's going to be 0.06. On this frame, it's going to be 0.05. And on this last frame here, we're actually going to zero it out, and we're going to turn off the sprite renderer as well as disable the circle collider. And then we can undo the record. This keyframe, we're going to remove this keyframe. We don't need that. And on this, we're going to click on the sprite and just delete that. And you're going to click on this last sprite here and get rid of that as well. So let's check our settings here. So collider is active, no size, don't render. Next frame, collider is active, 0.02, render the sprite, 0.08, 0.06, 0.05, nada. So now if we play this, so that's our explosion. Start at the beginning, starts small, gets big, goes small to nothing. So let's save that. So that's our first one. With that completed, we're going to zero this back out on the coordinates, and then we're going to turn it into a prefab. So go down to the effects folder under prefabs and drag your explode effect in there. and then you can delete it from the scene. So that's our first one. So that's the small explosion. Then we're going to create the big explosion. But to do the big explosion, we need a new image. So go over to the graphics folder. You can collapse that. Right click, import a new asset. And actually, we want the desktop. There. Inside of here, or your folder, there. You should have, if you downloaded it from GitHub, you should have a explosions PNG. So we're going to import that. We're going to change it to multiple, point no filter, no compression, apply that, and then open up the Sprite Editor. Now, I got this from Google Images. I forgot the website. I'll see if I can find it actually real quick. Hold on. If you do a search on Google Images for Mega Man explosions, this is the image that we're using, and this is basically where we're getting it from. So credits to the person that made this. And then back over in Unity, I actually opened up the image and I changed that background green to transparent, so you don't have to worry about doing that. But this is, from what I read, I believe you split, there's like, I guess, 3 big types of explosions in like the first 3 Mega Man games or something like that. And the first one here is the one that we actually want for Mega Man 1. And I believe this is what the explosion looks like for Mega Man 2 and Mega Man 3. So we're going to switch this over to the black and white. And this is actually composed of several frames. I'm going to end up fast forwarding through this after the first couple that we cut out, just because I don't think you want to watch me cut these, select each of these. So I'm going to do the first 2. We'll fast forward through the rest up until we get to like the last one. And so you can basically compare your results when you're done doing it. So first, we want this image. And we're going to do, in case you do want to cut these out and add more explosions for your game, we're going to call this explosions 1 sub 0. So, and if you do this one, then you could do explosions 2 and then 0 for the first frame, 1, etc. So that's how we're going to do the numbering. Okay, that was very painful. So you should have 19 frames. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Wait a minute. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, so these are all your frames. So that's done. We can close that. So now you have all these explosions. You can step through them, and those are all the frames. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing that we did with the first explosion. So you're going to create an empty. We're going to call it explode effect 2. We're not going to zero it out for right now, but you're going to add on a sprite renderer, a circle collider, an animator, and the explosion script. And on here, this is also going to be on layer 10, no size, and it's a trigger. So we'll save the changes to that. Go over to the explode effect 2 under animations and effects folders. Right click, create another animator controller. So this is explode effect 2. Create another animation, same name as last time, just call it explode. And make sure there's no loop time on that either. Then double click on the controller, click explode, go back over there, right click from selected clip. So now that animation is tied to that controller. And then we're going to go to our not prefab yet, but our explode effect here and put on the controller. So now on this explosion, we're using 30 frames a second because that comes out to be pretty nice. And some more fun. We're going to put all these explosions in here. This one's going to take a while to build out. So much like the first one, we're going to drop one, but we're going to skip. Let's move in on that. So the actual order of these, there are some frames that we're not going in the exact order because when I was recording the explosions on Killer Bomb from the actual game, they don't look to be in the right order. So we're gonna, I mean, you can do it however you want, but in this we're going to follow 0, 1, 2, 3, 8, 4, 9, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and then 18. So this is, oops. Heck. No. So that was 1. Then we need 2, 3, and 8. So 2, 3, and then we're going to drop in 8 there. And then 4 and 9. So then we're going to drop in 4, drop in 9, then 5, 6, 7, 9. So then 5, 6, 7, 9, and then 10 through 18. So that's very straightforward. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and last 18. And then we're going to drop 18 again just to create that frame. Okay. So on this one, we also want the circle colliders enable, the circle colliders radius, and the sprites renderer, or the enable. Okay, so let's save this. Now we're gonna have to change all this. This is gonna take a while too. So when I get through it, we're gonna fast forward through this as well. And when we get through it, we'll go through each frame, and then you can see the settings, so you can match yours up to this. Okay. So let's hit record. First frame. Okay, so these are the animations. So let's play this out. So that's our explosion number 2. So on our first frame, we're going to have the circle collider enabled, no size, no render. Then we're going to actually have the picture show up. So it's going to be enabled 0.08 and a renderer enabled. From this point on, the renderer will stay enabled up until the very end. And throughout this, we're going to basically be changing the size of the collider. So on the next frame, frame 2, it's going to be 0.1. Third frame, 0.11. Fourth frame, 0.15. Fifth, 0.18. Sixth, 0.15. Seventh, 0.17. The eighth is 0.16. And the ninth is 0.18. And then the 10th is 0.19. 11.17. 12th, 0.18. 13th, 0.22. 14th, 0.23. 15th, 0.22. 16th, 0.23. 17th, 0.26. 18th, 0.3. 19th is 0.29. 20th is 0.29. And the last one, no size, circle collider disabled, no sprite rendering. And that is our big explosion right there. Okay, so now we're going to zero this guy out. So it's back at the center. Save it. Get this out of the way. We're going to go back over to the effects prefab folder, and we're going to drag that to create an effect for that, or to create a prefab of that effect. So now we can nuke it out of the scene. Save your changes. Now we have our explosions, but now we're going to code when the explosion damages the player, if the player touches that explosion. So back over in Visual Studio, we have our explosion script open. Well, first things first is we do not need a start or update on this, so we're going to nuke those. We're going to add a variable called damage, and it's going to have a default value of 0. So explosions do not cause damage unless we tell them that we want them to cause damage. So most of the characters always have the small explosion. It doesn't do anything to Mega Man. However, the bigger explosions have damage. So now we need a public void function. We're going to call it set damage value. And we're going to pass how much damage it inflicts. And we're going to set the value. The next thing we need is a private void. And we're going to use the trigger. And this is going to be the stay. So if Mega Man happens to still be touching that trigger, even after he's done with his invincibility from being hit right after, it's going to hit him again. So we want the trigger stay. Change that to other. And we only want to apply damage if there is damage to apply. And so we're going to do it against the player. So we're going to check the tag. We're going to look for player. And then let's get the player. Object, get component. We're going to get the player controller. And much like we did with when we just touched enemies, we want to see what side we're hit on so that we can apply the opposite force to that so they bounce in the opposite direction. So we're going to use that hit side function again. And location of the explosions X in relation to where the player's X is. So if the explosion is greater, which means it's on the right side, because this hit side is looking for right side. So if it's right side is true, otherwise it'd be false. So we want to make sure that if it's true, we want it to basically mean it's the right side. So enemies on the right means it's true. And then we're going to apply damage to the player. And how much damage? The value that's been set. So that is all that there is to the explosion script. So no damage by default. We set the damage, and we actually set the damage in the enemy class or the enemy controller. Once they actually, is it? Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, so when the enemy explodes, we set the damage. And then this will, if the player ends up touching, then we apply damage. So let's save that. Now we're going to make changes to the enemy class. So we're going to go over to the enemy. And first thing I want to do is whenever the script gets applied to an enemy that we're going to create, I want it to require the animator, the box collider, rigid body, and sprite renderer components. So we're going to start our script out with require component, type of, and we're going to copy this, add it 4 times. So we want the animator, want the animator to be required, the box collider 2D to be required, the rigid body 2D to be required, and the sprite renderer. So we're going to start our script out with this first. And having done that, we're going to get the handles to these items. Before we can do that, we need them as variables. Then we're going to create a variable for our explode effect. Let's see here. We need a new public int called explosion damage, which is going to determine how much. We're going to default it to 0, but this is going to determine how much damage our explosion will cause against the player. And a serialized field of GameObject for the prefab. So we need these, we need this, and we need this. So down here in start, we're going to get those components. And we're going to get the rigid body. Bear with me. And sprite renderer. Okay, so now we have handles to each of those components. Save those changes. After our defeat function, we need to create a couple more functions. Actually, before our defeat function, we'll put it up here. So we're going to create a new void. It's going to be called start defeat animation. And this is what's going to basically start the explode effect. So we're going to create another one called stop defeat animation. And we're not going to technically use this unless we want to stop it early before it stops itself. So we're going to have this just in case we want to stop it ahead of time. But otherwise, it's going to play out and then it's going to destroy itself when it's done, so it doesn't stay on screen. So inside of the start defeat animation, we're going to use that variable that we created ahead of time called explode effect. And normally we could have just said GameObject this, but the reason we did this up here is so that we can use it down here and kill it ahead of time if we wanted to. So that's why we didn't just generate it in here as a GameObject, as like a local variable. So we have it as part of the class. So explode effect, and we're going to instantiate that. And we're going to give it the prefab. So then we're going to set its name. This is just me being OCD because I don't like clone in the names. And then we're going to use the prefab. So then we set the name so it matches up with the prefab's name. Then we're going to set where it's going to explode on screen. And this is actually going to be where the center of the sprite is. So that's why we need the sprite. So we're going to set its transform, its location on screen to where the center of the sprite is. So it explodes basically from the center. And then the explode effect. Then we're going to get that script that we created because we're going to set the damage value. And that's where the explosion damage was that we set up ahead. So we're going to set the value. And we exposed it as a public. So we can set it in the inspector what the value of the damage is. So this dot explosion damage. And then we're going to destroy it. We're going to destroy it, and then we're going to tell it to destroy itself after 2 seconds. Our animation shouldn't be longer than 2 seconds, so it'll finish before 2 seconds and then destroy itself. And down here in stop, it's basically the same thing, except we're just going to immediately stop it instead of waiting 2 seconds. So if we wanted to stop we wanted to destroy the animation ahead of time, then we can just call this function to get rid of it. Now to actually use it, we don't really need that anymore. So when we get defeated, start defeat. So we call this to create the explosion, and we remove our game object, which is the enemy. And then defeat, if you remember, was called from take damage, and once the health is equal to 0, it calls defeat. So with that complete, if we go back over to Unity here, and we're going to go pick up our first guy here, the first penguin. Actually, that's the first penguin there. You're going to see now we have some more stuff on here. We have the contact damage, which, well, we already had the contact damage. Actually, we have explosion damage, and then the prefab for his explosion. So we can assign which explosion prefab we want our enemy to use. So they don't have to always use the same one. So we're going to go to, this guy's going to use, we're going to try out the first one. And we're not going to have any damage. So let's bring our scene back over. Stretch this out. Let's try this out. So save our changes. Play it. Now if all goes well, our penguin should explode. So before he would just disappear, but now he should disappear and explode. And there he goes. So when he was defeated, it created a copy of that explosion, and he just removed himself and exploded. So let's see that bigger. And there. So that's our animation. So let's try it with the damage. Let's say we're going to explode, and if I happen to be within the radius of that explosion, then he should take off 5 health units. And then boom, he collided with the explosion. And if we go look up here, actually you're not going to see it there. He's missing 5 health now. Cool. So now let's try the second explosion, the big explosion. So we're going to change the go back to Peppy, scroll down here, and we're going to put the second effect on him. Let's make it, he takes off 10 if he explodes. So play that. Let's try it first before. So that's our big explosion. Play it again. Shoot. And we fell in with it before it disappeared, so we got damaged. And if we look at our health over here, we lost 10 health. So that's how you can apply damage when you touch the explosion. And that's what happens when you face this killer bomb. If you kill a killer bomb and you happen to be within that explosion, you're going to get hit. So that's explosions. So now we're going to apply that. Let's get this out of the way. We're going to apply that to all of our guys here. Let's just highlight this entire group here. Let's start them all out at 0. We're going to give them all number 1, but we'll say the first guy, the third, and the last one, we're going to have them as number 2. We'll say the first guy, he'll take off 5. The second guy, he'll take, well, the third guy actually, he'll take off, let's just say 10. And this last guy, he's going to take off 15. He's going to really hurt you. So save that. Bring it back over. We can just bring it to this. We don't care about this now. We're going to play it. So we should have a big explosion, a small explosion, a big explosion, small explosion, and big explosion. So big explosion, small explosion, big, small, big. We'll do it again, but now we're going to get touched. So we're going to get real close, shoot, boom. That explosion went out and happened to hit Mega Man. If I touch, well, shoot, doesn't hurt me. This one should hurt me, boom. And you see I ran over it, it didn't hurt me. Now this one should kill me. Oops, darn it, wasn't close enough. Do it again. Shoot, hit, shoot, no hit, shoot, hit, shoot, and here we go. Boom, I just died. But I don't have an explosion. Now we're going to work on my explosion. So the player's explosion is actually really cool. So we're going to get this out of the way for right now. Before we do that, we need to we're going to create the pieces of the animation. We need the controller and the animation itself. So we're going to go into the animation effects and then player explode. You're going to create another controller. This controller we're going to call player explode effect 1. So you can have multiples if you want. So this is number 1. And then we're going to create an animation called explode. Now the thing about this animation is we're going to have it repeat. So we want loop time on this so that basically each of the explosion particles keeps pulsating, and it just gives over and over and over and over as they spread out across the screen. So we're going to go double click on the animator, go back and highlight the explode animation, right click and add the clip to the animator. And then we can come back over here. Then we're going to create another empty. We're going to call it player explode effect 1. And this one we're going to 0 out. And we're going to come down here in scripts because we need another script. And this is going to be called player explode effect. And is that what I called it? Hold on a second here. I think that's what I called it. No, actually I called it player defeat effect. So there. Now on this object, we're going to add that script. So we're going to drop that over there, and these use the same as the first animation that we created for the enemy, the same frame, so we need to make that 1.5 also. And then we're going to open that up in Unity and leave that for right now. Off of this, we're going to create a child, and then we're going to call it Explosion 1. Because what we're going to do is there's going to be 12 of these that all start from the center and go across, they're going to move across the screen in different directions and different speeds. So we need to create the first one that once we're done modifying this, then we're going to duplicate it 11 times and rename them all. So on here we need a Sprite Animator. Oh, I'm sorry, Sprite Renderer. Why does it do that? And then we need an animator. Okay. Now the layer order for this one, we want it 15. We want this above everything. Above the enemies, above the Mega Man before he disappears, all objects on the screen. So we're going to make this layer 15. And then we're going to go over to our folder here, and we're going to take our controller and drop it on there. And then once we've done that, we're going to duplicate this now. So we just highlight it and Control D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So now we have 12 of them, but we're going to rename all these to 2 through 12. 3, 4. You're going to find out why. 5 when we get to the code. 6. Okay. So now with that, we need to create the explosion. The explosion is very, very, very simple. And I need to see, I forgot what speed, I gotta figure out, I'm gonna have to come back to this, so I forgot what speed I set it at. But before we do that, we're going to drop in the graphics, go back over to graphics and go back over to the enemies. And it's going to be explode 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're not going to do anything fancy with it. It's just one. You might want to zoom in though, because we are going to have them all next to each other. 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to save that. And I'll be right back. I'm going to see what speed I had it at. I think it was 6, but I'm not sure. Actually, I think it is 6. We're going to change it to 6. It should be the same speed as the other explosion that happens with the enemy, 6 frames a second. So let's actually just bring this over, preview it. Actually, that looks kind of slow. Maybe it's 12. No, that's too fast. It was 4. I think 4 is going to be too slow. Yeah, I'm going to have to look this up. I'll be right back. Actually, it is 12. I don't know why it seems No, my eyes are playing tricks on me. Seems like it's going too fast, but no, I did have it set at 12. Okay, so each of these explosions are all the same. What's going to happen is they are all going to originate out of the middle, out of the center of Mega Man. When he dies, they're going to go boom, and they're going to go up, down, left, right, angles, etc. But to be able to do that, we need to do it through the script that we're going to create, the player defeat effect script. But before we do that, we'll get to that. This is actually done in this regard, so we're going to go and drop that and create a prefab out of that. So now that we have a prefab of the explode, we're going to remove it from the scene, and then we're going to go over to our script that we're going to create now. We need some variables. Actually, we need 3 variables. The first one is a public float, which is actually going to be the speed of the explosion, which you can modify in the inspector. So you can choose whatever speed you want yours to be at, but by default for me, it's 0.75, which I found was a nice speed for the explosion to have for all the particles to move in different directions at. Then we need game object array, actually, and we're going to call that explosions. And there's actually 12 of them, 1 for each particle. So I'm going to create an array of 12. And then next is a vector3 array, which we call explosion vectors. And this is going to basically hold the information for each direction each particle is going to move. So we're going to come down here, close that off. Now we need 12 of them. So I'm just going to copy, fill these in one by one. So we're just going to put them all at 0. Copy this and drop it in 11 more times. Okay. So first particle, we want to go left. So negative x. Then we want one to go right. So positive x. Then we want one to go down. So negative y. Then we want one to go up, positive y. So now that's 4 of them. So then we need one to go bottom left. So 0.75. So that's bottom left. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We're going to change the negative positive on these. So this is left and down. Then we need left and up. So then we need right and down, and then we want right and up. Then we need 4 that are half speed. So when the first 8 go out, then there's going to be 4 more that come out that are slower. So these are basically the same as the top ones. However, they're at half speed. So the first one's going to be negative 0.5. So that's negative x, 0.5f, so positive x, and then negative 0.5y, which is negative y, and then positive y. So those are our 8 vectors that we're going to use. And inside of our start function, we're going to get all those explosions, all those game objects that we created in the prefab. So, there's 12 of them. We'll just use the length in case we ever wanted to Oops. In case we ever wanted to change the size of it. And inside of here, we're going to get a string. We're going to call it explosion name, which is going to be the explosion. And this is why I named it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So we know the index is zero-based index, so +1, convert it to a string. So name explosion 1, next one explosion 2, etc. And then index of explosions. And we're going to find each one. We're going to look in transform. We're going to find each object. And then we're going to look for it based off its name and get the game object. So we're going to basically populate this with each of those game objects for all the children off of the main explosion, the parent. So we're going to get each one of those so that we can use them. Then in the update, we're going to do the same thing, but now we're actually going to move them. So int, so integer I is less than, once again, explosions dot length, and then I plus. And in here, we're going to do a vector 3 to get the position. Of that particle, that explosion. So then we're going to get it. So now we got the position of that explosion. And then we're going to modify its position. Explosion vectors. So we're going to take the x of that particle. We're going to multiply it by the explosion speed. We're also going to times it by time delta time, so that it moves at a constant rate regardless of how fast the frames are updated. So let me see here. It's supposed to be plus equals, not plus. So x is we're gonna move the x based off the vector times the speed times delta time. And we're gonna do that on all three axes. So we're gonna do it on the y. And we're gonna do it even though we don't use the z, because the transform has a z, so we're gonna do it on the z, but because this is basically always 0, it should always be 0 here too. And then we're going to update the new location, the new position, by assigning it what we just calculated. And we're going to do this every frame for each explosion. So they're all going to go in different directions. 8 of them are going to go in the same direction, but 4 of them are going to go slower than the first 4. So we're going to save that and go back over to Unity, and we double check this. I can get this out of the way. We have our 0.75, which we're going to leave, and we have our script attached. So before we can use it, we need to go and modify our player. So we're going to go back over to Visual Studio and go to our player controller. If you don't have yours open, then you can go into Scripts and double click on the player controller. And we're going to have to add some more variables for all this to work. We need to add the sprite renderer, because much like we did with the enemy, we want it to explode from the center of the sprite. So we need to get that, and we can use it for other things later if we needed to. So we're going to start with that, and we're going to add another serialized field, and this is going to be a game object, and this is going to be the prefab of the explode effect. just like the enemy. Well, basically, it's almost exactly what we're doing. It's just like the enemy. So we're going to get that sprite component, sprite renderer. Let's save that. And we're going to go down. Let's see, where are we going to go to? I'm going to go past all this, and you're going to see how do we do it? Well, we set it up the last time. So we had take damage. If the health is in, we do defeat. Otherwise, we do the damage action. So let's go check out defeat. So defeat, all we do is destroy the game object. Well, we're going to create, just like before, we're going to, with the enemy. So we're going to add another, we're going to create another function. Same name. We're going to call it start defeat animation. And inside of here, this is what I was telling you before, because we're not actually going to, we don't need a handle, we don't need like a global variable for it. We're just going to create it inside the variable inside. So we're going to call it explode effect. We're going to instantiate that with our prefab. And OCD kicks in, and we're going to change the name to match the prefab. And then we're going to set the location where it explodes at. And it's the transform's position. We're going to do it in the center, wherever the center of the sprite is. And before, down here we destroyed it, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to take that and put it in the defeat. So at the end, after we get the explosion created, then we're going to destroy the game object. So what we're going to do down here in defeat, though, is we're going to call invoke. We're going to do it half a second after he dies. So it doesn't like explode like right away. He's going to explode half a second after it gets called. So let's save that. And let's try it out. So let's go back over to Unity. Bring this green back over and actually get out of our explode effect. We're not really going to be able to tell if it works or not until we die, with the script aspect anyway. So let's bring this in, bring this over, play it. So we know this guy's going to take 5 off of us. And then that much. So here we're going to find out if it works or not. So I'm going to shoot him and see, forgot to assign the prefab. So we're going to go over our player. Always forgetting something. We're going to go over to, no, not there, to our effects prefab folder and assign our player explode effect. So we can save that. Do that again. All right. Explode 1. Explode 2. Next guy should kill me. Oh, come on. Get closer. See, this is why we have the keys. We're going to put the keys in after, so when we hit E, it just explodes. So we don't have to do this. Explode. And explode. There's my explode. So it's an explode on top of an explode. So let's just do the debug function now. make life easy. So let's go over here. We're going to go up, and where we're going to create this at. Well, first, we're going to put it before all of this. So we're going to call it player debug input, and then we're going to do it here. So void player debug input. I can't remember if I put. I don't think I had any other stuff that had to do with debugging yet. Yeah, so this is from scratch. So the first thing, let's do if input dot get key down is equal to key code. So I'm going to use P, or actually E for explode. So we're going to use E. And so what we're going to do is when we press the E key, we're going to call the start defeat animation. And then what we'll do is we're going to put debug log, and we're just going to say that just so we know what's going on. We'll see it on the screen, but just so it's in the log. So start defeat animation. Okay. So when we press E, the player is going to explode. Next one, we're going to say if input dot get key down. Speed this up in a sec. So if I press I, so when I press I on the keyboard, I want to become invincible. So we're going to call the invincibility function that we created. I forgot which video it was, but we haven't used it really until now. And then we have a variable called isInvincible. We're going to negate that. So if it's false, it'll become true. If it's true, it'll become false. So we're going to drop that in there so we can become invincible or not invincible. So let's say invincible. Okay. So then we're going to drop that on the debug line. And we also want to, well, we haven't gotten to freezing input yet, so we're going to come back to that in a sec. And what we will do is, if we press the B key, we want to, well, actually we can't because we haven't done that yet. So actually, we can't do that yet because we have to do all the freeze functions. So let's start with explode and invincibility, the two things that we can do. So we're going to come back over to here, bring the screen back over, and we're going to play it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up and press E, and I just exploded. So that's our explode effect. So each of those starts from center, and then they work their way out, up, down, left, right, top, left, etc., etc., etc. So let's do it one more time so we can see it. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to jump E, I'm going to pause it, and we'll step it. So jump, E, pause, and then you can step through. So they all started from the center, step, boom, 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 and as each of them goes out, you'll see the animation is just looping. So the animation loops. And then just keep going and going and going. Now this is just going to keep going indefinitely. And that's where in the next video we have the game manager. So we're going to have so much that this will play and then it'll restart the scene, or you can say restart the level. So let's undo that. And it's going to keep going and going and going. So now let's try invincibility. So play it. Right now if I run, boom, I get bumped. I'm going to press I. Pressing I, you see down here it says invincible is true. So if I run into him, hey look, he's not hurting me. So now I'm invincible. So I'm going to hit I again. I'm no longer invincible, and I can get hurt. So that's how you can do invincibility. Or you can call it God mode if you want. But you see I'm losing. I'm going to shoot. I'm going to lose some more. Shoot. Shoot. Boom. That damage is killing me. And what I'm going to do here, and then boom. I exploded because I died. And let me see. We had the hit side. I don't know, it's going to probably be a little hard. Yeah, it's going to probably, before I get to it. And anyway, trust me, it'll work. So when I hit the explosion, I bounce back. If I'm on the other side, it'll bounce the other way. So now let's do the freezing. So the freezing is we're going to be able to freeze the player, freeze the bullets, freeze the enemies on the screen when the player dies or any other time. Maybe he's traveling through a passage to a boss, freeze everything, he freezes on screen, moves him over, door opens, door closes, etc. So to do that, we need to create some variables. But what I think I'm going to do first is we're going to do it on the enemy. Actually, we'll do it on the bullet. We're going to start with the bullet, then we'll do the enemy, and then we'll come back to the player. So starting with the bullet. Whoops. Okay. Save that. All right. So to freeze, we are going to create a new flag. It's going to be called freeze bullet. We're going to do it underneath the destroy time here. So we're going to put bool freeze bullet. And by default, it's already going to be false. And then below that, we're going to add a rigid body constraints 2D variable. So we're going to call it RB2D constraints. And we can save that. And let's see here. Yep. Okay. Then we're going to come down and let's see here. After our shoot function, we're going to create a public void called freeze bullet. And it's going to have a bool called freeze. So we're going to pass whether true or false, whether to freeze or not to freeze, or freeze or unfreeze. So in here, if it's freeze, if we're freezing, otherwise, we're not freezing. So when we're freezing, we want to say that freeze bullet is true. And then this is where the RB. So what we're going to do is we want to capture the current value of the RB, the rigid body constraints. So that's why we need this variable. So we're going to get the current rigid body constraints, and we're going to save them in that variable. And what we're also going to do is if our bullet had animation to it, we want to freeze the animation so that it just stays completely on whatever animation it's on, and it doesn't move. And to do that, you're going to say the animator speed value, you're going to set it to 0. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change our rigid body constraints, and what we're going to change it to is we're going to tell it to freeze all. Freeze all basically means it's going to lock the X, Y, and the Z. So those are all going to be frozen. And then we know that our bullet uses velocity to move, so what we're going to do is we're going to zero out the velocity. We're going to set it to nothing. So that's when it freezes. When it unfreezes, it's kind of basically the opposite. So our freeze bullet is now going to be false. We're going to set the animator speed back to 1, which is the default. We're going to set our rigid body constraints to the value of whatever we saved. So we already know the bullet basically is it freezes the X and freezes the Y. The X is the only axis it moves on. But just in case we ever had bullets that go in opposite directions, maybe like a reflection when it hits something invincible, it reflects it in an opposite direction and it goes like in an angle, then we can have, this would be good for that. Then we have the velocity. Our velocity is as it was before, so basically it's the bullet direction times the bullet speed. So that's the same as before, which is basically right there. It's the same thing. So we're giving it back the same direction and speed that it was before. So we're going to save that. But this really doesn't do anything until what you need to do then is every frame the bullet moves, remember it's got a time that it lives by. But we want to make it so obviously we don't want it to expire while it's frozen. So if freeze bullet is true, then we just want to exit the function. So if we freeze and it hasn't died yet, we're just going to keep going out, 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 out until it's unfrozen, and then it'll start ticking down again and remove it. So that's to freeze. Now we're going to go modify the enemy. So the enemy, it's the same concept, slightly different, but we do need a rigid body constraint 2D variable so we can save the current rigid body RB2D constraints. So we can save the current values and we have something to save them in. And we're going to create a bool called freeze enemy, but it's going to be public. So let's save that. We're going to come down past defeat and create a public void called freeze enemy. And just like the bullet, we're going to pass it whether it's going to be frozen or not frozen. And if it is frozen, otherwise it's not frozen. So in here, freeze enemy is going to be true. Set the animator speed to nothing. Capture the rigid body constraint, whatever the current value is, so rb2d.constraints. Save those. And rb2d.constraints is going to be equal to freeze all. So with that, let's just copy this, drop that there. We know that this is now going to be false. We're going to put the animation speed back. And then our constraints is actually going to be equal to the value that we saved before we froze. And then we're going to save that. So that's the enemy. Now the player, with the player, we're going to create 3 variables here. And they're all bools. First one's going to be freeze the input, then freeze the player. And this isn't technically, shouldn't really be here. It should really be in the game manager, but for the sake of this, because we want to test out freezing the bullets, we're going to create a variable called freeze bullets. And later we'll move the freezing of the bullets actually into the game manager, so it's looking for the key to do that. Because it's not really, this isn't really player related. So we're going to just have it in here for now. And then we're going to go, we're going to do the rigid body constraints 2D. And then we're going to create a variable for that so that we can save that. And let's save that. So what we're going to do, all the way down to where defeat is, we're going to add a couple of functions here. And they're going to be public. First one is public void freeze input. And the purpose of freezing the input is if you don't want the player to be able to move the character during whatever scenario that you have going on. So you're going to say freeze input is going to be equal to the value of whatever's passed it, which is freeze. So that's the first function. The second one is public void, much like we've been doing with all the others. That this is going to be called freeze player, so this keeps the player locked on the screen so it doesn't move around. And that's also going to have a value of freeze. And you know what, I'm just going to take this is very repetitive in a lot of ways. So we're going to copy the freezing of the enemy and we're going to drop that into the freezing of the player. But it's not freeze enemy, it's freeze player. And the constraints, it's still an animator speed of 0, and it's still going to have the constraints, etc., etc. And it's going to be freeze the player, speed back to 1, put the constraints back to the way they were. Save that. So now we're going to deal with the freezing of the input. So to deal with the freezing of the input, it's real simple. It's a flag. So if input is not frozen, then we want to capture the input. Otherwise, we ignore the key presses. Very simple. So we just gonna, this is what I was talking about earlier in one of the other videos. If it would be better to have all these like maybe grouped together, but I wanted to separate them out just so that, you know, this is direction input, jump input, and in this case shoot input. But ideally, now we have this flag check in 3 different places, but it's all right. It isn't the end of the world. So there now. So if freeze input is false, then we get the you know the key on each frame. Otherwise, we ignore the input and therefore nothing happens. So they can't move left, can't move right, can't jump, can't shoot, etc. So now that we have that, we're going to test this stuff out. So let's start with the bullets. I find the bullets to be fun. So if input get key down is equal to keep code B for bullet. So we're going to have to see, because we can have multiple bullets on the screen, obviously. So we're going to see how many bullets we get. So bullets, we're going to use the game object. We're going to find all the game objects with tag, and that's why we added a tag to the bullet prefab, because we're going to look for all objects in the scene that happen to have bullet, and which should all be bullets. So if we found some bullets, damage bullets greater than 0, what we're going to do is, that's why now we created that freeze bullets variable, because we're going to negate that. And then we're going to go through each bullet that is currently in the scene that has not destroyed itself yet. And so what we're going to do for that bullet, we're going to get the component, and then we're going to get the bullets, use the bullet script. And inside our bullet script, we created a function called freeze bullet, and we're going to pass the value. It's either going to freeze them or unfreeze them. And then down here, in the if, we're going to dump in a you know what? Let's just copy this and change it. Always type this stuff out. So we're going to say freeze bullets, and then freeze bullets. So when we press B, we're going to get all the bullets that happen to be in the scene, because they're going to be tagged as bullet. And if we did find some, actually, well, whether it did or not, we're still going to log it out anyway. current value, negate it, true or false. For each of the bullets, we're going to freeze them or unfreeze them. So let's go and do the other ones that we weren't able to do earlier. So now we're going to freeze the player input. So input dot get key down, key code of, I use K because I can't use F. Well, you could use F, but I don't want to use F. Just use K so they're all by each other. So then we're going to say freeze input is going to be not freeze input. So it's either going to be true or false. Drop that, drop that. It's going to be freeze input, freeze input. Oops. All right, last one. I know this is turning a really long video. Drop that in, and then this is going to be P for player. Now we're going to freeze the player. So freeze player, freeze player. Okay, so this is our debug function. Freeze bullets, explode, turn on invincibility, freeze the keyboard input, and freeze the player on the screen. So these are our key codes, B, E, I, K, and P. Let's try this out. Now we can finally get towards the end now. Okay, so I'm going to jump and press P. So it says freeze player is true. I am now on the screen. I am not moving. I'm stuck in the air. However, if I go left and right, I can press left, I can press right, I can shoot, because my keyboard input hasn't been disabled yet. So now I'm going to press K. Now it says freeze input true. So now I'm going to press C, counting on the C. I am not shooting. Left and right, no movement. So undo. So now freeze input's false. I can shoot again. Shoot, 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 shoot. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot some of those bullets. I'm going to press B to freeze them. B. So now the bullets are frozen. I'm going to freeze me by pressing P. I'm going to get ahead of those bullets. Now I'm all the way down here, and I'm going to press B. And here they come. There they just flew by me. So that's freeze. Press K. Can't move. Can't move at all. It still blinks because I'm only frozen the input. But if I'm going to see if I can freeze in, nope. I want to freeze him when he's blinking. Well, kind of hard to get him, but freeze, shoot, 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 B, unfreeze, boom, B. So there's a little bit of debugging. So now we jump up, explode, which is E. And I believe we hit the end. What do you know? We made it all the way through. A really long video again, but that's okay. So we added in our explosion animations, and we added the ability to have explosion damage on those animations. We have two animations for the enemies, a small one and a big one, and we basically tied it to each one of those penguins so they could be either one, but the penguin in the actual game is only the small one, and he does not apply damage. So when we actually create this penguin in not the next video, but the following one after that, we're going to build him out. And we don't actually use the freeze enemy yet, but we're going to. But freeze enemy is going to be called from game manager, and it can be called from any other place, but that's going to freeze the enemy on the screen. So it's the same thing with like Mega Man. And Mega Man is going to be frozen when he dies. So he's got his own explosion, which follows vectors, and so each of the particles goes in its own direction at its own speed, and the animation on each of them just loops over and over. In the game, it's actually those particles are blue, but I don't have blue ones, and I don't want to be messing around with shaders and all that. So, and then we have some keyboard input, so we can explode on command if we want to just test it out. We can freeze in the air, which is basically what happens, really. So let's just actually play that real quick. Because what happens is when he dies, we're going to freeze everything, including him. So we're going to say jump, freeze, and explode. So that's really what the effect we're looking for. That's why we need freeze also. Is when he's in the air, say, or he's on the ground, but we're going to say I'm in the air, up, freeze, kaboom. So that's what we're shooting for. That's the effect. And now we can trigger invincibility. There will be other ways that we can trigger it, but that's how you can trigger it to test it out through the keyboard. So if you press I, you can run on these enemies and nothing will happen to them. And actually, let's do that. So I'm going to go I. We know that these big explosions hurt me, so I'm going to go into invincible. I'm going to go and shoot him. Nothing happened. You can't kill me. You can't hurt me. I can blow up through all of you and nothing happens. And so that's the end. So as a bonus, if you'd like, what you can do is tag the explosion, because the explosion right now, it will not freeze on the screen. And we could have it so that you freeze that. So as a bonus, you can do that. I don't know if in the next video I'll actually code that one out, but you can take a stab at it if you want. I'll think about it, whether I'm going to do that or not. But in the next video, we're going to introduce game and sound managers, because right now it's been very silent and I've been keeping the music paused the whole time. But we're actually going to set up the game and sound managers. So now when we shoot bullets, we're going to have that boo 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 sound. And when our enemy explodes or reflects it as, because if they're invincible, it's going to make a different sound. So we're going to have sounds. So that's going to be a lot of fun on the next video. And the game manager, we're going to have it, so it's very similar. We're going to have, actually, we're also going to put in a score. We're going to put in the scoreboard. So we're going to have scoring. So when you kill an enemy, they're going to be worth a certain point value, and it's going to add it to Mega Man's score. And so that's going to be part of the game manager. So each time one of these enemies dies, they're going to basically say, hey, I'm dead. This is what I'm worth. And it's going to tell, hey, game manager, this is the score. And it's going to go and add it on to Mega Man. So we're also going to bring in a font. So we're going to bring in the font so that we can have it displayed up here at the top. And that should be an interesting video. And then after we're done with that, we're going to finally start making enemies. I know it's been a long journey, but we're almost there. So bear with me, one last video before we get to that. And I know that I originally said that this was probably going to be a 4 to 5 video series. I totally underestimated it because I wanted to cover a lot of aspects on things. And so it's actually, I think, going to be 10 videos because I've already kind of planned them all out. So this is video 4. The next video is going to be the game and sound managers. And then the 3 videos after that's going to be on creating enemies. It's going to be creating the penguin and penguin and killer bomb, since they basically are the same and they both follow Bezier path, a Bezier curve. And so we're going to bring that in. And then we're going to do Mambu, I believe, was going to be the 7th video, because I wanted. Each of them has I bring them in because I have a plan for each of them. So that's going to bring in invincibility of an enemy, so that when you shoot and his shell is closed, it actually doesn't hurt him. But if the shell is open, then it does hurt him. So we're going to bring in an animation events on that. And then the last one for the enemies, we're going to do Big Eye. So Big Eye's got a pattern with his jumps now. So we're going to work on that. Following after that, videos 9 and 10. On video 9, we're going to include the keyboard, or not the keyboard, the gamepad controller, so you can actually play it on a phone, And on video 10, we're going to actually export it to Android. Now, I don't have Apple. I don't have an app developer account or any of that, and really don't have I have a MacBook, but it would not be able to run this. So We're not going to be able to publish to iOS. So you may have to look that online to be able to do it, but I'm sure it's pretty much the same concept. But I know with that, it exports it to, so you have to open up an Xcode and then you build it from there. But in this, it builds it all in one shot when it goes to Android. And then you can put it on your phone if you have an Android, and you'll be able to play your game on your phone. So that's where I'm going to end up stopping after 10 videos. So then I'm going to go back to actually working on this and developing it out, and I'll come back possibly after that and introduce much smaller videos at that point, where it's going to be, okay, this is the teleport. Okay, this is the this is entry into the boss level where we stop all the stuff and do a little bit of cinematic animations or whatever, things like that. Because I'm giving you all the building blocks to put this together, and that's why we're only doing three enemies instead of all the ones I've already built, because it's all the same concept, and you're just going to build that around the whatever enemy you're going to work on. So once you have the blocks, you should be able to build them out on your own. And if you get stuck, you can always ask questions, because I'm going to be building some more of those enemies, like the Susie, the adhering Susie. I still got to get back to Kamodoma the flea and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm rambling on. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a little slow at first, and I'm building out those animations and getting it all in there, but we've laid a lot of the groundwork down, and then we're going to get to the fun stuff starting in the next video, the real fun stuff, and then onward after that. So ciao, have a good day, and if you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you want, share it, and take care.